Let's talk about flying in a zero emissions future. We have to reach zero emissions. All current aeroplanes emit greenhouse gases at a high altitude and have a lot of effect on global warming. And the short answer is that in 30 years' time, we have to stop flying. So surely there must be some alternatives. And of course, people are trying to develop other ways of flying without emissions. Really, there are four of them. Having a plane powered by solar cells is possible, but you need so many solar cells that you can only power a very, very lightweight small plane. Planes flying with electric batteries will take off in the next few years, but they're only going to take a small number of people a short distance. Nobody is trying to develop a battery plane in order to fly long distance. There's also two options for alternative fuels. We could potentially create kerosene from biomass, but unfortunately it requires an enormous amount of plant material, and we're going to need that for food, so there won't be enough spare to allow us to use anything like today's level of kerosene. And the last one is, can we use electricity to create a synthetic fuel? Yes, we can, but it needs an enormous amount of electricity, roughly 5 times more than if the plane flew on batteries. That means that the technologies will keep developing, but over the next 30 years, there won't be any significant options for flying without emissions. Well, that sounds pretty miserable, and it's going to be tough, especially for families separated over long distances. But in fact, during lockdown, what we've learned is that business travel was almost unnecessary. We've learned how to do virtual meetings so well, and we've only begun. If you think about the technology in a game that teenagers use and apply that to what we're doing on video conferencing, there's so much potential there. And we're going to develop that and learn how well we can connect over distance without needing to go. Let's talk about flying and zero emissions. An aeroplane is a Bunsen burner that takes in fossil fuel at one end and emits greenhouse gases at the other end. But in fact, it has a more powerful effect than if it was happening on the ground level, because at altitude it also creates contrails and has a larger effect on warming than the equivalent fuel being burnt in a car. In our national statistics, strangely, we report only domestic flying rather than international flying, and we report only the carbon dioxide emissions, not the full global warming effect. If we were honest about the impact of flying in the UK, it actually causes about 12.5% of all of our global warming. There are some possible substitutes for flying being developed. A solar plane has flown around the year with one person in it over several days 2 years ago. There are some small battery-powered aeroplanes being developed that will take a small number of people a short distance, but nobody is developing a battery-powered plane for long-distance flights. There are two alternative fuels being developed, biokerosene and synthetic kerosene. However, biokerosene demands a lot of biomass, and the estimates are that to provide today's flying, am I going on too long? To provide today's flying would require 60% of all the sustainable biomass harvest in the world. We can't possibly do that, given that we also want to eat it. Synthetic kerosene requires electricity, but making it requires an enormous amount of electricity, something like 5 times more than if we flew the plane on batteries. The reality, therefore, is that in the short term, we have no options for zero emissions flying, and therefore to reach zero emissions, we need to stop flying. Can you imagine the number of people who want to tell you that that's not the case? The existing industry, all of its suppliers, and current politics want you to believe that you can carry on flying, that there is a green alternative. There isn't. There are no options now for zero emissions flying, and by 2050, the date of our targets, there won't be any either. So we're going to stop flying for a short while, and later on it will come back. But what we learnt in lockdown is that we can live really well without flying. There are so many other ways to communicate, to have holidays, to enjoy spending time together. We don't need to fly. We're humans. We've got more imagination than that.
About 3 minutes and quite technical in some parts.
Yeah.